When I first smelled the scent of lilies coming from his car, I thought it was a mistake. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. That was the first moment I felt the tiny fracture in the life I had thought was steady. I had been married to David for 15 years, and for all those years, I believed in the rhythm of our routine, the clatter of the coffee mugs in the morning, the way he always kissed my forehead before rushing out the door, the quiet evenings where we sat together in silence, sometimes watching old movies, sometimes just letting the hum of the house fill the gaps. I never suspected that behind the ordinary walls of our home, there were secrets that could shatter everything I thought I knew about him, and about us. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I was proud of our modest home on Maple Street, the garden I tended like a small ritual of care, the smell of fresh bread every Sunday morning, and the way David would hum while cooking dinner, even when he burnt the garlic. Our kids, Hannah and little Oliver, were the center of our world. Hannah, 16, was an old soul with quiet intensity. Oliver, 9, had a laugh that could fill the biggest silence. Our home was a patchwork of family memories, birthday balloons still dangling from last year's celebrations, school art pinned carefully to the fridge, and the slow tick of the clock that I had learned to measure my own heartbeats by. I often told myself that love was a series of small gestures, and David, despite his occasional grumpiness, was consistent in the little ways that mattered. I didn't know then how fragile consistency could be. The first whispers came from the neighbors, subtle at first. Mrs. Jensen, who always prided herself on knowing everyone's business, mentioned casually, "I think I saw David driving out of town last weekend, with someone else's groceries in his car." I laughed it off. Maybe he was helping a friend. Maybe she was imagining things. I wanted to believe it. I clung to that belief. But curiosity has a way of digging when you try to ignore it. And I began to notice the little inconsistencies, David leaving the house early on weekends, claiming work trips that were never fully explained, coming home with faint traces of perfume that wasn't mine lingering on his coat. I tried to silence the creeping unease in my chest. I told myself I was being paranoid, that years of trust should outweigh these tiny anomalies. But deep down, a shadow of doubt was growing, small but insistent, whispering that something was off. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when the first undeniable clue appeared. I had gone to the grocery store, a simple errand, and returned to find a small envelope tucked under our welcome mat. My name was written on it in David's handwriting, familiar, unhurried, but the words inside made my hands tremble. A receipt, folded neatly, for furniture delivery. Not in our town, but in a town 15 miles away, a place I knew we had no reason to visit. I tried to convince myself it was innocent. Perhaps he was planning a surprise, a renovation for our home. But the dates didn't add up, and the words on the receipt whispered secrets that didn't belong to our ordinary life. There was something meticulous about the order, bed frames, children's furniture, small touches of luxury that didn't exist in our modest home. And then, the most damning detail, several items labeled in a woman's name. I froze, standing in the kitchen, the envelope clutched in my hands, the smell of toast and brewed coffee filling the air. My heart thumped so loudly I could hear it over the kettle's whistle. This wasn't just about furniture. Something was hidden, something carefully constructed outside our life. I didn't confront him immediately. Fear makes you pause. Shock paralyzes even the most rational minds. I observed him, the way he laughed at my corny jokes, the way he kissed Hannah on the cheek before school, the way he ruffled Oliver's hair. And yet, a veil had fallen over my perception, one that allowed me to see him but never fully understand what lay behind his eyes. In the evenings, I would sit on the porch, pretending to water the garden while my mind wandered to that envelope. I replayed moments, searching for a clue I had missed. Every week that passed, my unease grew. And then came the whispers from work friends, casual mentions about David being seen at dinner with unknown women, subtle enough to be dismissed, yet persistent enough to gnaw at my certainty. I remember the night it hit me hardest. I was folding laundry, a mundane task I used as a meditation, when I found a small, intricately folded note inside one of David's jackets. It smelled faintly of the same lilies I had noticed in his car weeks ago. The note was brief, intimate, words of love, of longing, of secret plans. My hand shook as I read it. The truth, or at least a part of it, was staring me in the face. There was a life of his that I had never been part of, a family that existed parallel to ours, and I had been blissfully unaware, thinking that we were everything to each other. That night, I lay awake, listening to the slow creak of the floorboards, wondering how well you can really know someone you've spent decades with. I thought of Hannah and Oliver, and the betrayal I felt wasn't just for me, it was for them, too. How much of their father's love was real? How much had been a carefully staged performance for our little family? I didn't yet know the full extent of it, but the first spark of resolve ignited. I would find out. I needed the truth. And whatever it held, I knew I couldn't continue living in the shadow of doubt, letting a quiet deception corrode the life I had built. The days after I found that note, the quiet hum of our home felt heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I went through the motions, making breakfast, packing school lunches, driving the kids to school, but my mind wasn't on the routine. It was following him. Watching him. Trying to read the invisible lines of his day that didn't intersect with ours. It started with small observations. His phone, which used to sit on the counter, was now clutched in his hand whenever he walked through the door. He'd step outside, speaking in hushed tones, and I'd catch fragments of his conversations. "I'll see you at 6, yes, I'll bring the papers, don't worry, it's all set." The way he smiled while speaking, soft and tender, made my stomach knot. I didn't want to know the other person, but somehow I already did. I began to notice patterns in his departures. Fridays, often around 5 o'clock, he would say he was meeting a client or checking on a project. But sometimes, the car would disappear for hours, and when he returned, there was a faint scent, citrus perfume mixed with the warmth of coffee, that I didn't recognize. He'd hug me goodnight, and I'd smell it clinging to his collar, my heart tightening like a fist around hope and fear. I tried to rationalize. Maybe he was helping a colleague. Maybe I was overreacting. But then came the next clue, something I couldn't ignore, a photo accidentally left on the printer. It was of a house I didn't recognize, but furnished, tasteful, deliberate. A living room with throw pillows that matched none in our home, a small pair of children's shoes neatly lined up by the doorway, a woman's scarf draped over the armchair. I stared at it for a long time, my chest tight, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were telling me. I started asking questions, gently at first. "Whose house is this?" I'd say, casually, as if I were making conversation. David would look at me, pause, and say something dismissive. "Oh, just a project I'm working on." For work. But the weight in his eyes, the slight hesitation, was enough to tell me he was lying. And I was no longer willing to be placated by half-truths. I needed evidence. I began tracking him in subtle ways, notes of the addresses he mentioned, little clues from receipts, casual questions about his weekends. Each breadcrumb added up, and the pattern that emerged was undeniable. David had been investing time, money, and care into something outside our home, outside our life. My stomach ached with the realization that his affection for me, the tenderness, the warmth, the smiles, might have been shared with someone else, someone I had never met. Then came the evening when my suspicions crystallized. I had gone to pick up Oliver from his soccer practice, and while driving home, I followed David's car from a distance. He didn't notice me, and as we drove through the outskirts of town, I saw him turn down a narrow road I had never been on before. My heart raced as I followed him, trying to keep a safe distance, the autumn wind brushing against my face, carrying the scent of wet leaves and exhaust fumes. The road ended at a house that looked lived in, familiar in a domestic way, but not ours. The lights were on, soft and inviting. Through the windows, I could see furniture that mirrored the photo I had found, children's toys neatly arranged in the living room, a woman's silhouette moving gracefully between the kitchen and the hallway. I felt my world tilt, the ground beneath me shifting. David smiled at her in a way I had never seen him smile at me, and she laughed softly, a sound that seemed to fracture the foundation of my life. I didn't confront him that night. I drove home in silence, the hum of the engine filling the empty spaces where my trust used to live. I couldn't believe it, couldn't reconcile the man I knew with the life he had been leading in secret. My mind raced, asking questions I didn't want answers to. How long had this been going on? Who were they? Did they know about me? Did he love them the way he had loved me? Sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet creaks of our home, and imagining the laughter and warmth that existed somewhere else, just beyond the walls I had once thought contained our entire life. I remembered the way he used to kiss my forehead, the way he held our children close, and I felt a hollow ache, a betrayal that went beyond the tangible, touching the very essence of what I had believed family to be. By the next morning, I knew I had to act. I couldn't live in the shadow of doubt any longer. I started documenting everything: photos of receipts, notes of addresses, dates of his absences, small pieces of conversation I overheard. Each entry was like a stitch in a tapestry I hadn't wanted to see, but now couldn't unsee. Even in the kitchen, with Hannah laughing at a joke I made, and Oliver asking for pancakes, I felt a constant tension coiling in my chest. I looked at David, standing at the counter, pouring himself coffee with that habitual hum, and I realized I didn't know him at all. Not the full him, not the man who had built a life outside of ours. That was the turning point, the moment when curiosity and heartbreak merged into resolve. I didn't yet know what I would do with this knowledge, or how I would confront it, but I knew I could no longer pretend everything was normal. The house he had built, the family he had nurtured in secret, was a fracture in the world we shared, and it demanded reckoning. For the first time in years, I felt a strange mix of fear and empowerment. Fear, because I was stepping into unknown territory. Empowerment, because at last I was seeing the truth. I wouldn't be blindsided anymore. I wouldn't be the unwitting participant in a lie. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it. And so began the slow unraveling, the careful investigation, the quiet observation, the sleepless nights where every detail mattered. The story of the man I married, and the life he had kept hidden, was about to come fully into the light. I remember the day I finally decided to see it for myself, the full truth laid bare. My hands shook as I held the keys David had once carelessly tossed on the counter weeks ago, keys to a house I didn't know existed. I had followed the addresses, traced the receipts, and memorized the patterns. Now, standing before the front door of that suburban home, all the careful steps of months led to this moment. The house was immaculate, every corner meticulously arranged. A vase of fresh flowers on the dining table, a small stack of children's books by a plush armchair, and a scent in the air, soft, floral, unmistakably feminine. My chest tightened. This wasn't just another apartment, another affair. This was a life. A family life. Built in parallel to mine, with care, intention, and secrecy. I crept closer, the sound of my shoes muffled by the damp grass, and peered through the window. That's when I saw her. The woman, David's other life, was folding laundry, humming a tune I had never heard him hum at home. 2 children played nearby, laughing, oblivious to the storm I felt rising inside me. I could see the tender way David held one of the kids on his hip, the gentle way he brushed the girl's hair out of her eyes. And in that moment, something inside me broke. My knees nearly gave way. All those mornings, all those evenings of shared meals, whispered conversations, bedtime stories, they weren't enough to anchor him. His love, or at least the life he showed me, had been shared elsewhere all along. I didn't knock. I didn't call. I just watched, hidden behind the blinds, letting my heart fill with the quiet horror of realization. And then he looked up. His eyes caught mine through the glass, and for a fraction of a second, the world stopped. The look on his face, shock, guilt, and a flicker of fear, confirmed everything. He knew I had found him out. I didn't stay long that day. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The image of that house, those children, and the life I had never been part of burned into my mind. I could no longer deny it. David had built a secret family. My husband, the man I had trusted, loved, and built a life with, had another wife and children somewhere else, and he had been keeping them alive while pretending our life was complete. That night, at home, I waited. He walked in, humming a tune that once made me smile. I felt a sudden, cruel urge to laugh, but all I could do was stand there, trembling, trying to hold the calm I knew I would need to confront him. "David," I said softly, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt inside, "we need to talk." He froze, coffee cup in hand, eyes wide. For a moment, I thought he might try to deflect, deny, or escape. But instead, he looked at me, and I could see the cracks forming in the careful mask he had worn for years. "You know," he whispered. I nodded. "I know about the house. The other family. Everything." There was a silence that stretched between us, thick and suffocating, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock. My children were upstairs, and for a moment I felt a sharp stab of fear of what this revelation might do to them, to us, but it was quickly replaced by a fierce, icy determination. I had to face this. I had to understand it, confront it, and decide what came next. "I trusted you," I said, my voice rising slightly, though I tried to keep it measured. "I trusted you with my life, David. And all this time you've been living a lie." He looked down, shame washing over his features. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said, voice small. "I thought I could manage it. I thought I could keep everyone happy." "Happy?" I laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "Do you know what that feels like? To come home every night and share your husband with a life you didn't even know existed? Do you know what it feels like to realize the man you love is living half his life elsewhere?" He reached for my hand, but I pulled back. "Don't. Not now. I need answers. I need to understand how this could happen." And he told me. He spoke of loneliness, of fear, of a gradual drift from our relationship that led him to seek comfort elsewhere. He painted pictures of guilt and remorse, of stolen weekends and whispered promises. But no apology could erase the betrayal. Every word he spoke was layered with regret, but also with a truth I couldn't deny. This had been deliberate. This had been hidden. I remember feeling an odd mixture of anger, sorrow, and clarity. Anger at the deceit, sorrow for the family I had unknowingly shared him with, and clarity because now, finally, the pieces were laid out. The hidden house, the children, the laughter I had once envied from afar, they were real. And the life I thought I had was irrevocably changed. I left the conversation without making a decision that night. I went upstairs, closed my bedroom door, and let the tears fall in silence. It wasn't the dramatic confrontation I had imagined. It wasn't screaming or shouting. It was quiet devastation, the kind that seeps into your bones and leaves you raw, hollow, and painfully aware of your own strength. That night, I realized that discovery was only the beginning. The betrayal wasn't just a secret house or hidden children, it was the shattering of the trust one had given freely, the quiet erosion of the foundation on which my life had been built. And I knew that whatever came next, I had to reclaim my agency, my dignity, and my sense of self. The days after the confrontation were a strange mix of numbness and relentless focus. I woke up early, staring at the ceiling as if it held answers, the echo of David's words still ringing in my ears. "I never wanted to hurt you." But his intent didn't erase the betrayal. Intentions were invisible, actions were tangible. And his actions had torn a hole in my life that I could no longer ignore. I realized I needed to act, but not recklessly. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about truth, protection, and reclaiming my life. I began quietly documenting everything: bank statements, receipts, phone records, addresses, little details that would form a pattern of his double life. Each note I took was like stitching together a map of deceit, and with every stitch, I felt a small sense of power returning. I hired a private investigator. Not because I wanted dramatic confrontation, but because I needed confirmation, tangible evidence that would withstand the chaos of emotion. The investigator was discreet, professional, and thorough. Within a week, the pieces came together: photos of David at the secret house, receipts for groceries and school supplies, records of utilities and furniture delivery, all under his name, all verified. It was undeniable. I remember the day the report arrived. I sat in the quiet of our living room, the children's laughter echoing faintly from upstairs, and opened the envelope. Each photograph felt like a punch, but also a key. There was the woman, sitting at the kitchen table, helping the children with homework, smiling in a way that had once been mine. There was David, holding the youngest child, brushing hair from her face, whispering words that were never mine to hear. The evidence was brutal in its clarity, but it was also freeing. I had known the truth, but now I held it in my hands. Confronting him again was inevitable. This time I was composed. The first confrontation had been raw, fueled by shock and heartbreak. This one would be deliberate, precise, and grounded in facts. I presented the evidence calmly, watching his face pale as the truth reflected back at him. "David," I said, voice steady, "I have proof. All of it. This isn't about feelings anymore. This is about facts. The house. The family. The children. Everything." He looked at me, eyes wide and trembling. I didn't think you'd find out like this." "You hid it for years," I replied softly but firmly. "And now, the choice isn't mine to forgive blindly. The choice is mine to protect myself, my children, and our life moving forward. And I will do that, with or without your cooperation." The days that followed were tense, measured. I contacted a family attorney to understand my legal options. I needed to know how to secure assets, protect the children, and ensure that David's secret life didn't financially or emotionally dismantle us. Every meeting with the attorney was a mixture of stress and empowerment. I realized that betrayal is not just emotional, it can ripple into the practical realities of life, and preparation was my armor. At home, I kept up appearances as best I could for Hannah and Oliver. I didn't want them to feel that the ground beneath them had crumbled completely, though inside, I was reshaping my world. I held them close at night, whispered reassurances, and told them that sometimes adults make mistakes, but love and honesty are what keep families strong. One afternoon, I decided to visit the secret house. Not to confront, not to provoke, but to see for myself the extent of what he had hidden. I drove quietly, the autumn air crisp against my face, my heart steady with purpose. I observed from a distance, the routine, the care, the family life that had existed without me. It was a bitter sight, a reminder of what could have been, and what could no longer be mine. I returned home with a sense of resolve. Seeing it in person wasn't a comfort, it was clarity. I needed to decide my boundaries, what I would allow, and what I would cut off. It wasn't about revenge, it was about self-preservation, about refusing to be a silent participant in a lie that could have swallowed my entire existence. Communication with David became transactional and factual. I set clear expectations, financial transparency, legal agreements, and emotional distance. He wanted explanations, forgiveness, and promises I wasn't ready to give. I offered none. I realized that control, not anger, was my strongest weapon. I would decide what role, if any, he would play in my life and in the lives of our children, on my terms. There were nights I cried in the shower, letting the water wash over my face while the world outside remained oblivious. There were mornings I held the children a little tighter, whispering that we would be okay. And slowly, with each deliberate step I took, legal advice, documentation, observation, setting boundaries, I began to feel the raw edges of my heartbreak begin to smooth. This stage wasn't dramatic or cinematic in the way movies portray betrayals. It was quiet, calculated, and deeply internal. But in that quiet, I found something stronger than anger, I found clarity. Betrayal, I realized, doesn't have to define your life. You can act with dignity, with foresight, and with the unshakable knowledge that your worth is not diminished by another's deceit. By the end of that first month, David had no choice but to acknowledge the truth. The secret life, the house, the other family, they could no longer exist in the shadows without consequences. And I, standing firm, had begun reclaiming what was rightfully mine, my peace, my clarity, and the beginnings of self-respect after a lifetime of trust misplaced. The truth, once contained in whispers and shadows, has a way of demanding to be known. I knew I couldn't keep this secret buried forever, not for my own sanity, and not for the sake of my children. Once I had the evidence, the facts, and my own resolve, the next step was inevitable. The world needed to see what had been hidden, not for revenge, but for justice and accountability. I started quietly. A few close friends, people I trusted implicitly, became my sounding board. I showed them the evidence, watched their eyes widen in disbelief, and felt a strange mix of vindication and sorrow. They didn't judge me, they simply acknowledged the truth, the betrayal, and the courage it took to confront it. The act of sharing lifted some of the weight I had carried alone for weeks. Word eventually reached a few neighbors. I didn't seek it out, but once the whispers began, the truth spread naturally. The same neighbors who had once wondered innocently about David's unusual errands now understood the full extent of his deception. There was shock, yes, but also a quiet respect for the way I had handled the situation. I had not exploded in anger or sought public humiliation. I had acted with dignity, fact by fact, step by step. David's reputation began to shift. Friends who had once called him amiable and dependable now looked at him with wariness, their smiles tinged with suspicion. His colleagues noticed changes too, the careful glances, the awkward explanations, the sudden isolation. I realized that consequences aren't always immediate, dramatic, or violent. Often, they arrive slowly, in the quiet withdrawal of trust, in the way others begin to doubt a person's integrity. The biggest challenge came when facing family. My parents, David's parents, even Hannah's closest teachers, they all had to understand the truth without feeling the burden of being caught in the middle. I met each conversation with patience, clarity, and unwavering honesty. This is what happened, I would say, and this is what I'm doing to protect myself and the children. It wasn't easy. Tears came, voices trembled, but I never let my message be muddled by fear or anger. Hannah, in particular, needed gentle guidance. At 16, she was old enough to grasp some of the betrayal, but young enough to be frightened by it. I held her close and explained, as simply as I could, that the mistakes of adults don't define her, and that our family, though shaken, would endure. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "Mom, we'll be okay, right?" I hugged her tighter and whispered back, "Yes, love. We will be okay." Oliver, young and innocent, needed no explanation beyond reassurance. He didn't need the details, he needed my presence, my calm, my love. And so I gave it, extra hugs, longer bedtime stories, little notes in his lunchbox that said, "I love you, always." My children's well-being became my anchor. David, meanwhile, faced a very different reality. The life he had built in secrecy began to crumble under scrutiny. His colleagues were wary, the secret house became the subject of whispered gossip, and even his other family had to confront the fact that the foundation of their life was built in part on deception. I watched from a distance as his carefully maintained world shook, knowing that every choice he had made carried consequences far beyond what he had imagined. Legally, I pursued clarity and fairness. I ensured that all assets were accounted for, that my children's needs were prioritized, and that David's secret life could not jeopardize the life I had fought to preserve. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about securing the future. Every document signed, every meeting with the attorney, was a small act of reclaiming control. I wasn't helpless anymore. I was deliberate. I was empowered. There were moments of quiet reflection, too. I thought about the people who had whispered warnings months ago, the fleeting doubts I had ignored, and the nights I had lain awake trying to reconcile love with betrayal. I realized that consequences are rarely swift or dramatic. Often, they come slowly, through the erosion of trust, the withdrawal of affection, and the undeniable clarity of truth. And sometimes, the greatest consequence isn't punishment, it's the moral awakening of everyone involved. One afternoon, I walked through our garden, the autumn wind carrying the scent of wet leaves and soil. I paused to inhale deeply, feeling a sense of calm that had been absent for months. The secret house, the hidden family, the betrayal, all of it had consequences, yes, but I had survived. More than survived, I had reclaimed my life, my voice, and my dignity. And in that quiet moment, I felt the beginnings of true closure. Because consequences are not only about the wrongdoer. They are about the survivor too. They are about what we choose to carry forward, the lessons we embrace, and the strength we cultivate. And I had chosen clarity, courage, and integrity over bitterness. In the end, David's secret life could no longer touch me, not because I had avoided pain, but because I had faced it, documented it, and acted with measured resolve. The community understood the truth. My children were protected. My home, though scarred, remained a place of love and safety. And I, standing amidst the autumn leaves and fading sunlight, realized that justice, when tempered with dignity, carries its own quiet reward. The weeks that followed the public unraveling of David's secret life were strange and heavy, but slowly, imperceptibly, life began to find its rhythm again. I won't lie, it wasn't easy. The emptiness he had left behind, the trust one had once placed so completely in him, didn't disappear overnight. But in its place grew a different kind of strength, one I hadn't fully realized I possessed until circumstances demanded it. Mornings became my sanctuary. I woke early, brewed coffee, and lingered on the porch with the crisp autumn air brushing my face. The sun would peek over the horizon, illuminating the garden I had tended through years of ordinary life, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of ownership over my own days, over the rhythm of my own life. The children would wake soon, and the bustle of breakfast, school preparations, and little conversations grounded me in the reality I could control and cherish. Hannah, now more openly expressive, would sometimes sit beside me, hands wrapped around a warm mug of cocoa, sharing her thoughts, worries, and dreams. I listened. I guided. I reassured. And sometimes, I just held her quietly, letting her know without words that we were safe, that love wasn't conditional, and that even after betrayal, trust could be rebuilt, not in the same form, perhaps, but in a truer, more resilient version. Oliver remained blissfully unaware of the depths of deception we had endured, and that was a gift. I made sure our home remained a space where laughter was possible, where he could be carefree, and where the stability he deserved was never compromised. In moments like these, watching him chase the leaves in the yard, hair tousled by the wind, I understood that life, even after upheaval, could still be beautiful. As for David, our interactions remained formal, measured, transactional. We communicated only when necessary, discussing logistics and responsibilities with clear boundaries. There was no room for emotional manipulation or vague promises. In this, I found a strange peace. I was no longer his captive, emotionally or socially. The man who had lived a double life now had limited influence over my days, over my home, over my children. And in that limitation, I found empowerment. I also began therapy, quiet sessions with a counselor who helped me unpack the layers of betrayal, the self-doubt, and the lingering guilt I felt for trusting so completely. It was humbling to admit that, for a time, I had doubted myself, wondering if I had missed signs or been naive. But in those sessions, I learned a profound truth: trusting someone doesn't make you weak. Choosing to reclaim yourself after betrayal makes you strong. One evening, as I sat by the fireplace, the soft crackle of the flames filling the room, I reflected on how much had changed. The home I had once thought impenetrable had been breached, and yet, it wasn't destroyed. The love for my children remained unwavering, my sense of self unbroken. The betrayal had tested me in ways I could not have anticipated, but it had also revealed a depth of resilience I hadn't fully acknowledged. I found small rituals that brought me back to center. Gardening became meditation. Early morning walks allowed me to witness the world waking up without expectation or judgment. Writing, letters never sent, reflections recorded in a journal, helped me process the complex mixture of grief, anger, and eventual acceptance. Each small act reinforced my autonomy, my right to live fully and freely, without the shadow of deceit looming over me. Hannah and Oliver began to flourish in this environment. Hannah discovered a love for painting, while Oliver developed an obsession with building things in his small wooden workshop in the garage. I encouraged them, celebrated them, and reminded myself that their innocence and growth were the most tangible victories in this journey. Protecting and nurturing them became not just a duty, but a source of deep fulfillment and joy. Slowly, I also began opening my heart to the idea that life after betrayal could still contain connection and even love, but it would need to be measured, conscious, and reciprocal. I was no longer the person who gave trust blindly. I had been tested, and I had emerged wiser, stronger, and more attuned to the realities of human behavior. Perhaps the greatest lesson I learned was about self-worth. I realized that being deceived does not diminish you, nor does it define your story. What defines you is how you respond, how you rebuild, and how you choose to move forward with dignity. I reclaimed my narrative not through vengeance, not through bitterness, but through intentional action, clarity of boundaries, and the unwavering commitment to my own life and my children's well-being. By the time winter arrived, there was a quiet peace in the house. The holidays, once fraught with tension and unspoken questions, were celebrated with genuine laughter and warmth. David's presence was no longer central. He had become a chapter in our history rather than the author of our present. The home that had felt fractured now held a sense of completion born not from perfection, but from resilience and conscious rebuilding. I often reflect on that secret house, the parallel life that existed just beyond my awareness, and I realize that it was never truly about material things, or even love in its superficial sense. It was about choice, the choices we make, the secrets we keep, and the responsibility we bear for our actions. And I, by choosing honesty, courage, and clarity, reclaimed my place in a life that is whole, even after betrayal. Sometimes, when the wind rustles through the trees in our garden, I pause and feel a quiet gratitude, not for what was taken from me, but for what I have gained, self-respect, clarity, and the profound knowledge that even after heartbreak, life can be beautiful, whole, and meaningful. As I sit here now, in the quiet of our living room, I sometimes think back to that first moment of suspicion, the scent of lilies in his car, the strange receipts, the hidden notes. It feels like a lifetime ago, yet the lessons remain vivid, etched into my heart. Betrayal is a wound that cuts deep, but it also reveals the depth of our own resilience. I learned that truth cannot be hidden forever, and that confronting it with dignity and clarity can restore a sense of control over a life that feels shattered. I learned that self-worth is not measured by another person's honesty or loyalty, but by the courage to stand firm when the world seems to tilt beneath you. And I learned that love, real love, is never about possession, it's about respect, trust, and the quiet constancy of care. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this: betrayal does not define you. What defines you is how you rise after it, how you protect yourself and those you love, and how you reclaim your life with grace and intention. There is strength in vulnerability, courage in truth, and healing in knowing that your story is yours to write. Would you have had the courage to uncover the truth? Would you have faced the betrayal, taken action, and rebuilt your life? I invite you to reflect, to share, and to consider the choices you might make if the people you love are not who you thought they were. If this story moved you, I encourage you to check the full video on the channel for the complete journey. And remember, even after heartbreak, life can be whole, beautiful, and meaningful, if you choose to embrace it.